Even though no one said anything out loud, the room shifted. People sense humiliation even if they pretend otherwise. I could feel eyes flicker in my direction, then away, as if they were afraid to be caught acknowledging it. Others kept their faces blank, trying to stay neutral, because no one wants to be associated with the person being made fun of. That's the thing about humiliation, most people aren't cruel enough to join in, but they're not brave enough to stop it either. They hover silently on the sidelines, hoping the moment passes quickly so they don't have to confront what it reveals about them. In that moment, I felt an odd mix of emotions, the sting of disrespect, the burn of embarrassment, the instinct to defend myself, and the impulse to walk away. My pride wrestled with my patience. My anger fought with my sense of control. But underneath it all, something deeper emerged, a calm, growing awareness that this moment wasn't just about his laugh. It was about everything that laugh tried to represent, a challenge, a dismissal, a declaration that he believed he held power over me. And maybe in that second, he did. Because humiliation works fast, it digs into your skin before you have time to defend yourself. But what he didn't understand was that humiliation has two possible outcomes: it can crush a person, or it can awaken them. And the longer I stood there, the more I felt the first flicker of something awaken inside me, something colder, sharper, more focused than anger. I started replaying the moment in my head, every detail, every nuance. The way he tilted his head back slightly when he laughed, like he was performing. The way he looked directly at me afterward, checking to see if his attack had landed. The slight smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth, as if he was proud of himself for making a point without saying a single word. That look told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't spontaneous. It was intentional. It was personal. It was meant. But humiliation, when someone endures it without collapsing, eventually turns into something far more powerful. And I could feel it happening in real time. My breathing steadied. My expression stayed calm. My body stopped reacting, and instead, my mind started preparing. Because beneath the embarrassment was a quiet realization that this moment was going to matter. Not because of what he did, but because of what I was going to do afterward. I didn't speak. I didn't defend myself. I didn't ask him why he laughed or pretend I didn't hear it. I simply let the silence stretch, and in that silence, I realized something important: he expected a reaction. He wanted me flustered, rattled, emotional. He wanted to feel bigger by making me feel small. And nothing unsettles a person who aims to humiliate you more than your refusal to give them the satisfaction they're waiting for. The room eventually moved on, conversations resumed, people shifted their attention elsewhere, but inside me, the moment stayed alive. Humiliation has a way of planting itself like a seed, small at first, barely noticeable, but capable of growing into something unexpected depending on how you nurture it. And as the minutes passed, that seed didn't turn into shame the way he'd hoped. It turned into clarity, determination, something focused and steady. Not rage. Not revenge yet. Just a growing resolve not to let this moment define me, but to let it reshape something inside me that had been dormant for too long. I kept thinking about how easily people assume they can laugh at you, how carelessly they wield their superiority, how confidently they underestimate you. And I realized that humiliation, when seen from the right angle, isn't just an insult, it's information. It reveals who they are. It reveals what they think of you. And more importantly, it reveals exactly what they don't expect you to become. And in that understanding, the moment of humiliation stopped feeling like a wound and started feeling like a spark, the kind that quietly lights the beginning of something they never see coming. There's a very specific kind of silence that comes after someone humiliates you, not the silence in the room, but the one that forms inside your chest, as if your entire body is holding its breath while your mind tries to understand what just happened. That silence arrived as soon as his laugh faded, settling over me like a thin layer of frost. I stood there, still, not because I didn't know what to do, but because something inside me insisted that reacting immediately would be the worst possible choice. It was in that stillness, in that brief pause, that a different kind of strength began to take shape. People think strength always looks loud, raising your voice, fighting back instantly, proving yourself in the heat of the moment. But the truth is, some of the strongest decisions you ever make happen quietly, without witnesses, without applause, without dramatic gestures. They happen inside you, in the parts of yourself that others can't see. When I chose not to react, it wasn't because I was weak. It was because for the first time, I understood the value of patience more clearly than the satisfaction of an immediate comeback. The silence gave me space to think, to breathe, to pull my emotions back before they could drag me into a reaction I might regret later. Everything in me wanted to respond, to say something sharp, to push back, to ask him why he felt so big that he could try to make me feel small. But layered beneath that urge was something steadier, the realization that I didn't need to respond right then. In fact, my silence was already a response he didn't expect. People who humiliate others depend on your impulsive reaction. They count on you to stumble, to lash out, to lose your composure. When you don't, you rob them of the power they think they have. So I stood there, not frozen, but choosing stillness. The moment stretched on longer than he probably intended it to. His laugh had been quick, effortless, cruel in its simplicity, but my silence lingered in a way that unsettled the air. I could feel his eyes on me, waiting for some sign that he'd hit his target. But instead of anger, instead of embarrassment, there was this slow, rising clarity that told me I didn't need to fight him on his terms. I could choose my timing, my method, my moment. And that understanding felt more powerful than any instant reaction could have. In that quiet space, I watched him too, not with fear or self-consciousness, but with a level of observation I hadn't felt before. I saw the subtle shift in his expression, the faint confusion beginning to creep in, the way his smirk faltered for a fraction of a second when he couldn't read my reaction. Silence can be unsettling for the person who expected chaos. He wanted a scene. Instead, he got a calm he didn't know how to interpret. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that silence is not emptiness, it's strategy. It's preparation. It's the breath before a new version of you speaks, or moves, or acts. That single silent decision changed the direction of everything that followed. Because it wasn't just a choice not to react. It was a choice to claim control. It was a choice to decide that his laugh would not dictate my behavior. It was a choice to protect my dignity by not offering it up in an emotional burst that would give him exactly what he wanted. As people began turning away, shifting back to their conversations, pretending they hadn't witnessed anything, that silence inside me grew sharper, more defined. It wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the silence of calculation. I wasn't thinking about revenge yet. I wasn't thinking about what I would do or how I would prove him wrong. I was simply thinking about why his laugh affected me, why it mattered, and why it pressed a button. The decision not to react immediately allowed me to sit with that feeling, to examine it, to understand its roots. It wasn't just about him. It was about every moment before him, every time someone dismissed me, every time someone underestimated me, every time I stayed quiet because I thought silence meant surrender. But now, for the first time, silence meant strategy. It meant restraint. It meant that I was no longer letting humiliation define me, but letting it reveal something I needed to confront within myself. As the noise of the room returned, my inner silence grew more powerful. It became a shield, one that helped me separate my emotions from my intentions. The initial sting was still there, but it no longer controlled me. It simply informed me. And that shift, from reaction to reflection, changed everything. I realized I wasn't going to meet his cruelty with impulsive anger. I wasn't going to let him pull me into a moment that benefited him more than it benefited me. The quiet decision I made wasn't about being passive. It was about choosing the right moment, the right place, the right way to respond. Because people who laugh at you expect you to break. What they never expect is for you to stand still, gather yourself, and decide that you won't give them the show they came for. That silent choice becomes your first act of reclaiming power. Not the loud kind. Not the obvious kind, but the kind that grows quietly inside you, shaping the path towards something much larger than the moment that tried to diminish you. There's a moment, somewhere between hurt and clarity, where pain stops feeling like something that weakens you and starts feeling like something that sharpens you. That moment came slowly for me, not as a sudden burst of inspiration or a dramatic surge of confidence, but as a subtle shift inside my chest, like a flame that had been flickering quietly finally catching enough air to grow. His laugh had stung, that much I couldn't deny. It had hit me in a place I didn't even realize was still sensitive. But the longer I stood in that silence I had chosen, the more that sting transformed into something steadier, something with direction. Pain has a strange way of presenting itself when someone tries to humiliate you. At first it feels personal, like an attack aimed directly at your identity, your worth, your presence. But when I let myself sit with it, instead of running from it or reacting to it immediately, I began noticing something interesting. The pain wasn't just about what he did. It wasn't even fully about him. It was about every part of me that had been stepped on before, every version of myself that had stayed quiet, every opportunity I'd let slip because I didn't want to make discomfort worse. His laugh didn't create new pain, it uncovered the pain I'd carried for years. And once it was uncovered, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Instead of letting it burn me, I let it illuminate things I had overlooked. Like the fact that people who laugh at others so comfortably do it because they assume their targets won't rise. Or that I had spent too much time trying not to upset anyone, trying to be easygoing, trying to avoid conflict even when I deserved respect. That realization wasn't pleasant. It wasn't comforting. But it was powerful. It made me understand that the humiliation he attempted was just a spark. The fire that followed depended entirely on what I chose to do with that spark. So I leaned into the pain. Not in a self-destructive way, but in a way that allowed me to break it down. I asked myself why his laughter mattered so much. Why his opinion carried weight it didn't deserve. Why I had allowed that kind of dismissiveness to become familiar. The answers weren't simple, but they were honest. And honesty, even when uncomfortable, is a kind of strength people don't talk about enough. It builds you from the inside, quietly, steadily, in ways loud confidence can't. The transformation didn't happen in an instant. There was no dramatic surge of empowerment. Instead, it came like a slow tide, subtle at first, almost invisible, but persistent, rising within me with every breath. I began to feel more aware of myself, more grounded, more prepared. My emotions no longer felt like waves crashing into each other. They felt like pieces slowly arranging themselves into something coherent, something focused. The pain that had initially shaken me now felt like fuel, and the more I examined it, the more it revealed about what I'd been avoiding, what I'd been tolerating, what I had been letting slide in the name of politeness. People often misunderstand transformation. They think it happens after the revenge, after the comeback, after the grand moment where you prove everyone wrong. But the truth is, transformation happens much earlier. It happens in private, in silence, long before anyone else knows it's happening. It's the moment you realize you're no longer reacting from a place of vulnerability but responding from a place of intention. The moment you realize you're done shrinking yourself to make others comfortable. The moment you understand that pain doesn't have to be the end of something, it can be the beginning. As I stood there, I felt that shift deep in my core. My posture straightened without me meaning to. My breathing steadied. My mind, instead of spiraling, began focusing. I wasn't thinking about revenge as a destructive act. I was thinking about revenge as reclaiming myself, my confidence, my space in the world. The humiliation that was meant to crush me had instead clarified something I'd been needing to see, that the only reason someone like him felt bold enough to laugh at me was because I had been holding myself back. That realization was the turning point. Not the moment when I planned what I would do next, but the moment when I stopped viewing myself as someone who needed to endure everything quietly. Pain had turned into power, not because it changed what he did, but because it changed what I allowed myself to believe. I wasn't weak for feeling hurt. I wasn't foolish for being affected. I was human. And in that humanity was a strength deeper than any loud confrontation could express. The transformation felt like a door opening, a door I didn't even know had been locked. I felt myself stepping into a version of me that no longer apologized for taking up space, a version that didn't crumble under judgment, a version that didn't let someone's cruelty dictate the tone of my day. And the most surprising part was how calm it felt. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, steady, controlled, a kind of control I had never experienced before. That transformation wasn't about him anymore. It wasn't about proving anything to the person who tried to humiliate me. It was about proving something to myself, that I didn't need to react impulsively to show strength, and I didn't need approval to feel worthy. Pain had opened a door, but strength was the one walking through it, reshaping me with every step I took in the silence I had created and the clarity that followed it. There's a moment, right after the pain turns into clarity, when your mind begins to move in a way it didn't before. It becomes sharper, calmer, more observant. That's when the real shift begins, not in your emotions, but in your strategy. I wasn't thinking about revenge in a reckless, furious way. I wasn't imagining scenes of confrontation or dramatic exchanges. What took shape inside me was something far more controlled, far more deliberate, far more dangerous to someone who believed they could humiliate me without consequences. It was the beginning of a plan, not born from rage, but from a quiet understanding that dignity doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. The more I thought about what happened, the more I realized that reacting in the moment would have only satisfied him. It would have given him exactly what he wanted, proof that he could get under my skin, proof that he mattered more than he actually did, proof that his mockery held weight in my life. And I refused to offer him any of that. So instead of rushing to respond, I allowed myself to step back mentally and emotionally, creating a distance between what I felt and what I intended to do. That distance became the foundation of the strategy forming inside me. Strategy in moments like these doesn't begin with plotting how to hurt someone. It begins with understanding what they expect and choosing the opposite. He expected an emotional reaction. He expected me to crumble or lash out or shrink. But strategy isn't about meeting expectations, it's about controlling the narrative so subtly that the other person doesn't even realize it's shifting until it's too late. So I watched him. Not with fear or resentment, but with analysis. The way he interacted with others. The way he talked when he wanted to look confident. The way he laughed when he wanted attention. The way people reacted to him out of habit, not respect. He wasn't naturally powerful, he was loud. Loudness is often mistaken for authority by people who don't know the difference. That insight changed everything. I didn't need to destroy him. I didn't need to embarrass him in return. All I needed to do was show, with precision and patience, that the version of me he laughed at was an illusion he created, not a reality I owned. The strategy formed itself piece by piece. It wasn't a single idea. It was a series of realizations stacking quietly on top of each other. First, I realized that true revenge is never rushed. Then, I realized that what I wanted wasn't a moment, it was an outcome. An outcome where he understood exactly what he had underestimated. An outcome where he saw me not through the distorted lens of mockery but through the clarity of undeniable presence. An outcome where his laugh eventually returned to him, not as humor, but as a reminder of his miscalculation. I thought about all the times I had stayed silent in the past, not out of wisdom, but out of habit. How many times had I allowed someone to cross a line because I didn't want to create tension? How many times had I chosen peace at my own expense? This time something was different. This silence wasn't surrender, it was preparation. It wasn't the quiet of defeat, it was the quiet of planning. And the more I understood that difference, the more confidence I felt growing inside me. Confidence not tied to ego, but tied to intention. As the strategy took shape, I felt my emotions settle into a kind of disciplined patience. I wasn't rushing to confront him because confrontation wasn't the goal. Awareness was. understanding was. Timing was. People underestimate the value of timing. They think revenge is about acting fast, striking back immediately, proving they're not weak. But true power isn't about speed. It's about choosing the exact moment when your actions carry the greatest impact, the greatest clarity, the greatest ability to shift the balance silently and permanently. I knew that whatever I did next had to come from the version of me that was growing in real time, the version shaped by clarity, not bruised by humiliation. So I waited. Not passively. Actively. Observing. Watching how he behaved when he didn't have an audience. Watching how he responded when people didn't give him the attention he craved. Watching how insecure bravado always collapses when there's no one around to applaud it. Each observation added another layer to the strategy forming quietly inside me. The most important part of the plan wasn't even about him. It was about me reclaiming space he thought he could shrink. I decided that the best response wouldn't be one fueled by emotion, but one built on self-expression, presence, and confidence he didn't believe I possessed. I didn't need to humiliate him. I needed to rise in a way that naturally placed him beneath me without me even touching him. That's the kind of revenge people never see coming, the kind where you elevate yourself so gracefully, so undeniably, that the person who mocked you has no choice but to notice the shift and understand that their laughter didn't break you, it built you. Each step of the plan unfolded with more certainty. Speaking only when necessary. Moving with intention. Showing my strengths in places he didn't expect. Letting my competence and composure speak louder than any retort ever could. Slowly, subtly, the balance began to shift. Not because I attacked him, but because I stopped holding myself back. That's the heart of a strategic comeback, not destroying the person who wronged you, but disproving the version of you they believed they had the right to laugh at. And as that strategy took root inside me, I felt the quiet rise of a confidence that didn't need to be shouted, a strength that didn't need to be proven, and a resolve that didn't need validation from anyone, least of all the person who once thought my silence meant I had nothing to offer. There's a very distinct shift in the air when the tables start turning, and the person who once felt untouchable begins to sense that something is changing, even if they can't explain what or why. It doesn't happen loudly. It doesn't happen in a single dramatic moment. It happens through a series of small, almost invisible shifts, changes in posture, changes in confidence, changes in how you carry yourself. And it was in those subtle changes that he first began to realize that whatever version of me he thought he had laughed at was no longer standing in front of him in the same way. The transformation wasn't something I broadcasted. I didn't announce my intentions. I didn't confront him about his behavior. I didn't retaliate with insults or with loud declarations. Instead, I let the new version of myself speak through presence alone. I walked differently. I spoke differently. I interacted with people differently. Not in a way that screamed revenge, but in a way that quietly asserted that I had reclaimed the confidence he thought he could damage with a single laugh. And the most powerful part of all was that the people around us began noticing before he did. At first, it was the small things. The way conversations naturally started drifting toward me instead of him. The way people listened more attentively when I spoke. The way my ideas, once overlooked or brushed aside, began getting acknowledged without me having to fight for space. And all of this wasn't because I changed who I was, it was because I finally allowed myself to stop shrinking. There's something magnetic about someone who moves with calm assurance, and that energy began shifting the room every time I walked into it. He noticed the shift slowly, almost reluctantly. At first, there was confusion, the kind of confusion that comes when someone who underestimated you starts realizing they may have miscalculated. He would watch from a distance as people engaged with me, laughed at my remarks, asked for my input, or gravitated toward me naturally. It wasn't dramatic, but it was undeniable. The same room where he once felt free enough to laugh at me began treating me with a level of respect he never expected to see. Then came the second stage, discomfort. There was a moment when our eyes met across the room, and I saw something new in his expression, something that hadn't been there before, hesitation. Not fear, not guilt, but uncertainty. He no longer knew where he stood with me. He no longer knew whether his laugh had actually landed the way he intended. I didn't give him any clues. I didn't give him any hints. I simply existed with the kind of confidence that carries its own quiet authority. The tables turn not when you strike back, but when the other person begins to feel the weight of their own mistake without you ever pointing it out. And that's exactly what was happening. Every step I took without acknowledging him, every accomplishment I made visible without apology, every moment I exuded calm strength was a reminder that his attempt to belittle me had not marked me, it had awakened me. As days passed, his behavior shifted again. He started overcompensating in small ways, speaking louder when I was around, trying to make jokes that people didn't respond to the same way they used to, attempting to reclaim the attention he once assumed was his automatically. But attention isn't something you can force, especially when people start seeing someone else in a new light. Without trying, I had begun to outshine him, not with arrogance, but with authenticity. There was a particular moment that defined the turning point more clearly than anything else. It wasn't a confrontation. It wasn't a dramatic exchange. It was the moment he tried to make another joke, a harmless one, not aimed at me, and no one laughed. The room went quiet, not harshly, not cruelly, but naturally. People simply didn't find him as compelling anymore. And in that silence, he glanced at me, just for a second, and I saw the realization flicker in his eyes. The realization that the power he thought he had wasn't real. It was borrowed. It relied on the silence of others. My silence, however, was no longer cooperation. It was independence. And he could feel it. There's a certain elegance to watching someone understand, slowly and painfully, that they misjudged you. It's not about enjoying their discomfort. It's about recognizing the shift in balance, a balance they once assumed belonged entirely to them. He didn't apologize, because people like him rarely do. But he became more cautious. His laughs became shorter. His comments became measured. He began avoiding situations where I was present because confidence can intimidate those who rely on mockery to feel relevant. And yet, I didn't feel victorious in a petty way. What I felt was grounded. I felt secure in the version of myself I had stepped into. I no longer needed validation. I no longer needed revenge in the traditional sense. The tables had turned not because I pushed them, but because I stopped holding them up. I let his actions reveal who he was while allowing my growth to speak for itself. The irony of the entire situation was that the moment he laughed at me was the exact moment he began losing the ground he believed he stood on. Not because of the laugh itself, but because he failed to understand that some people don't break, they build. Pain doesn't crush them. It molds them. And when they rise without needing permission. And the real turning point wasn't about me overpowering him. It was about him recognizing, in that quiet, uncomfortable way people often realize such things, that he no longer had any power at all. The final moment didn't arrive with fireworks or applause. It didn't come with confrontation, dramatic speeches, or any grand display of victory. It came quietly, the same way everything else in this journey had unfolded, through presence, through growth, through a kind of inner strength that doesn't need to announce itself to be felt. What made it powerful wasn't that he finally understood what he had done, but that everyone watching, including the ones who once doubted me, saw the shift for themselves without me having to point it out. What stood out most was how natural it felt. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. I wasn't planning my movements, calculating my words, or shaping my actions around the idea of revenge. I was simply existing in a version of myself that felt complete, steady, and unbothered by the noise that once controlled me. And that authenticity created an impact no deliberate strategy ever could have. The room felt different when I walked into it. Not because the atmosphere changed, but because I changed within it. People's reactions became subtle indicators of what had transformed. The same people who once overlooked me now paid attention without being asked to. The same people who once dismissed my ideas now sought my input. And the same people who had laughed along with him, or stayed silent when he tried to humiliate me, now seemed unsure of how to navigate around me, as if realizing too late that their silence had aligned them with the wrong side. My presence itself had become a statement, not loud, not aggressive, but undeniable. And that's what created the final impact. When I walked into the room that day, I wasn't thinking about him at all. I wasn't preparing a speech in my mind or planning to make a point. I was occupied with something else entirely, my own path, my own goals, my own growth. I was finally centered in myself, not in the shadow of his actions. That kind of focus radiates outward, and people notice it even when you're not trying to make them notice anything. He noticed too. I saw it in the way he shifted slightly when he saw me approach, not out of fear but out of a dawning understanding that he no longer knew how to relate to me. His old strategies didn't work anymore. His casual confidence looked strained. His attempts to speak with ease came off forced. It wasn't that I intimidated him, it was that he realized he could no longer diminish someone who had outgrown the version of themselves he believed he could. Mock. The moment that created the final impact wasn't something I orchestrated. It unfolded naturally, almost effortlessly. Someone asked for my opinion on a matter, and I spoke, calmly, clearly, without looking at him, without addressing him, without acknowledging his presence in any way that made him central to the moment. As I spoke, the room listened. Not politely, not out of obligation, but with genuine attention. They valued my voice. And in that simple interaction, something shifted permanently. He watched, and I could see it in his eyes, the slow realization that the person he laughed at had risen beyond his reach. The real impact wasn't in proving him wrong. It was in proving myself right. Every choice I made, the silence, the patience, the clarity, the strategy, had led to this moment where my growth spoke louder than any revenge ever could. The room responded to me differently because I responded to myself differently. Confidence has a way of echoing beyond your body, shaping how others experience you without you needing to demand anything from them. And it wasn't just him. The people who were there the day he mocked me felt it too. Some stole quick glances, as if trying to reconcile the person standing in front of them with the one they remembered. Some offered small nods of respect. Others shifted uncomfortably, perhaps realizing they had underestimated me simply because someone else had given them permission to. But none of their reactions mattered as much as the feeling within me, the feeling of having risen on my own terms, without bending myself into anger or bitterness. When I finished speaking, there was a brief silence in the room, not the heavy, suffocating silence that followed humiliation, but a thoughtful one, the kind that lingers when people need a moment to absorb what they just witnessed. And it was in that silence that I felt the impact settle fully, not on him, not on them, but within me. The journey had shifted something fundamental in who I was and how I carried myself, and that shift was the true victory. He looked down for a moment, just a brief flicker, but enough to show that he understood everything he needed to understand. Not because I had confronted him. Not because I had punished him. But because I had grown beyond the version of myself he had felt entitled to ridicule. And that was the final impact, not crushing him, not humiliating him, not proving him inferior, but proving to myself that no one's laugh, no one's mockery, no one's attempt to belittle me had the power to define what I became. The ones who caused the damage saw it. The ones who stayed silent saw it. He saw it. And most importantly, I saw it within myself, clearly, confidently, undeniably.